Imagine standing in a small, completely enclosed kitchen.
Okay.
And the cabinets are just packed with perfectly good food. There's fresh water, tea, boxes of biscuits. You have absolute unrestricted access to all of it.
Right.
Yet you lie down, literally 3 feet away from it all. And over the course of weeks, you slowly, agonizingly starve to death.
It's so visceral.
Or try to imagine standing on a desolate, freezing highway in the dead of winter. You walk 6 grueling miles into this flat, white wasteland. And then, for absolutely no logical reason at all, you turn around and walk all 6 miles perfectly backward. Stepping exactly into your own footprints until you just vanish.
I mean, it sounds like the premise of some surrealist film,
Yeah, it really does.
But these are actual events. They are these terrifying voids where the physical evidence completely violently breaks the fundamental laws of biology and physics.
Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled you are joining us for another deep dive. Today, we are looking at a massive stack of your sources.
Oh, we really are. It's a mountain of paper.
Yeah, we're talking decades-old police reports, coroner autopsies, maritime logs, and a bunch of private investigation notes. And our mission today is to explore that exact unsettling space where logic aggressively breaks down.
That's the best way to put it. Logic just stops working.
We're looking at 2 specific, deeply unnerving cases: the impossible voyage of Edward Neal and the baffling disappearance of Don Kemp. And as we lay out the pieces of these puzzles from the source material for you, you're going to notice a chilling through line.
For sure.
We're dealing with unresolved mysteries that feature completely bizarre timelines, physical evidence that was blatantly ignored by institutions, and contradictions that just defy basic human behavior.
What's fascinating here is how deeply human beings crave narrative closure.
Oh, absolutely.
We are biologically wired to want a beginning, a middle, and a rational end to every single story. If you break your arm, you want the x-ray to show the jagged white line so you can point to it and say, there is the problem.
Right, you want the proof.
Exactly. But these 2 cases aggressively refuse to provide that closure. They force us to question the reliability of official investigations, the assumptions we make about basic survival instincts, and honestly, even our fundamental understanding of time and space.
Yeah.
Because when the physical evidence at a scene completely contradicts the biological reality of the victim, you are left in a very uncomfortable, very dark place.
Well, let's step right into that darkness then. We're going to start with the maritime mystery of Edward Neal. The year is 1970.
Okay, 1970.
And to understand the profound impossibility of this case, we have to deeply understand the man at the center of it. Edward Neal is 66 years old, and he is a retired naval officer.
That is a crucial detail.
Right. We need to be incredibly clear about what that means. This is not some hobbyist who bought a nice sailboat for his retirement weekends. This is a man whose entire adult life was forged on the sea. We are talking about decades of ingrained, drilled maritime protocols.
And that background is really the foundation of the entire mystery. I mean, a naval officer trained in the mid-20th century possesses a skill set that most modern sailors, with all their GPS and screens, don't even comprehend.
Yeah, exactly.
We are talking about dead reckoning, celestial navigation, a deep, intuitive understanding of barometric pressure shifts, tides, and currents. For a man like Edward Neal, the ocean isn't an unpredictable wilderness. It's a highly readable map.
He knows how to read the room, so to speak.
Exactly.
So in the early summer of 1970, Neal decides to take his personal sailboat, which is a vessel named the Monaveine. And he's going on what is supposed to be an incredibly simple journey.
Very standard route.
Right. He is departing from the coast of England, and his destination is the Isle of Man. It's planned as a straightforward 36-hour straight shot right across the Irish Sea.
And we really have to look at the environmental factors of that specific route during that time window. A 36-hour sail for a naval officer is, well, it's the equivalent of a commercial pilot flying from New York to Washington, D.C. on a totally clear, sunny day.
Just a quick commuter flight?
Precisely.
Yeah.
The maritime logs from that period show absolutely no serious storms reported in the area he was traversing. The weather was entirely cooperative. I mean, the Irish Sea can be temperamental, certainly, but in this specific window, it was calm.
But wait, let me challenge that premise for just a second.
Sure.
Even if the broader weather reports were clear, couldn't a highly localized sudden squall like a microburst or something have caught him off guard, because the ocean is famously unpredictable, right?
It's a totally fair question. But we have to look at the mechanics of maritime survival here. Even if we hypothesize the absolute worst, a sudden unpredicted rogue wave, or a localized squall that blew him severely off course, Neil had the extensive training to handle it.
Because of the naval background.
Right. He knew how to reef his sails, how to secure the rigging, how to ride out a storm, and most importantly, how to reorient himself once the weather broke.
Right. He wouldn't just be lost forever.
No, a sudden storm might delay his arrival by a day or two. It does not explain him vanishing off the face of the earth.
But vanish he does. He never arrives at the Isle of Man. His family obviously reports him missing, and the Coast Guard launches this massive search operation. And for months, absolutely nothing is found.
Nothing at all.
No distress flares, no debris field, no sign of the Monaveine. It's as if the boat was just swallowed whole. That is, until the morning of August 12th, 1970.
Which is 3 full months later.
3 full months, right. And this brings us to a young man named Lawrence Hallahan. So Lawrence is just a regular guy on his daily commute, driving along a winding coastal road in County Cork, Ireland.
Okay.
He's looking out his window at an area known as Towhead Bay. Now, I want to paint a vivid physical picture of Towhead Bay for you.
Please do, because the geography is so important here.
It is this stunningly beautiful shoreline, famous for these incredibly dramatic, jagged rock formations that just jut out into the Atlantic Ocean. But because of those rocks, it is a highly, highly dangerous place for any watercraft.
Towhead Bay is a hydrodynamic nightmare.
A nightmare.
The rocks beneath the surface create these totally unpredictable eddies and rip currents. A seasoned mariner would actively avoid bringing a sailboat anywhere near those shores unless they had absolutely no other choice.
Right, you stay far away.
Exactly. Because if a vessel loses power or steering and drifts into a rocky bay like that, the physics of the ocean swells dictate that the boat will be repeatedly lifted and smashed down onto the jagged rocks. It's essentially a maritime meat grinder.
Which is precisely why Lawrence is so completely shocked when he glances out at the water during his commute and sees a sailboat just floating there.
Just bobbing around.
Yeah, it's gently bobbing in the water, maybe 3 or 4 yards off this treacherous rocky shore. And geographically, this is hundreds of miles away from Edward Neal's intended route to the Isle of Man.
It makes no sense.
It's like setting out on a morning jog in Central Park, only for your running shoes to be found sitting perfectly unlaced on a cliffside in rural Mexico 3 months later. The geography makes no logical sense.
The location alone signals a massive deviation. It implies a total loss of navigational control for a very, very prolonged period. But the condition of the boat is where the forensic anomalies truly begin.
So Lawrence stops his car. He remembers seeing the news reports over the summer about the missing retired naval officer. He runs down to the rocky shore, and sure enough, he can read the name painted on the side of the hull, Monaveine.
Wow.
So he carefully scrambles over these slippery, dangerous rocks, and because the boat is only a few yards out, he doesn't even bother taking his shoes off. He just leaps into the freezing Atlantic and swims the short distance to the vessel.
That's brave.
Yeah, he grabs the railing, pulls himself up onto the deck, and here is where the contradictions start piling up at just a staggering rate. First, he looks around the exterior of the boat. There's absolutely no obvious damage. None.
Which fundamentally defies the physics of Towhead Bay we just discussed.
Great.
If a sailboat drifts aimlessly for months in the open ocean, it is going to suffer major wear and tear. But more importantly, if it washes up unguided onto one of the most jagged, rock-filled coastlines in Ireland, you expect catastrophic damage.
Like holes in the hull.
Yes. You expect deep gouges in the fiberglass or wood, a broken keel, shredded sails, snapped rigging.
Yeah.
The pristine condition of the Monaveine suggests it didn't endure violent storms, and it certainly didn't crash into the rocks on its way in. It almost gently, magically, surgically arrived.
So Lawrence calls out, "Is anybody here?" And there's nothing, just the sound of the wind and the ocean. He assumes logically that there must have been some sort of hidden mechanical failure, like something that caused Edward Neal to abandon the ship into a life raft.
Sure, that's the logical leap.
So he starts exploring the deck. He walks over to the helm, right where the steering wheel is. And sitting right beside that steering wheel is a standard 2-way marine radio. Lawrence reaches out, flips the switch, and presses the on button.
And this is it.
It powers up perfectly. The static just hums to life.
This detail cannot be overstated. This is the first devastating piece of physical evidence that shatters the prevailing theory.
I have to stop right here because this makes my brain hurt. How is this possible? You have an expert mariner, a man whose entire career was built on strict naval protocols.
Right.
If there is an emergency, literally any emergency, from taking on water to a medical event, The absolute very first thing you are trained to do is reach for the radio that is inches from your hand and issue a distress call on the emergency channel.
Absolutely. It's muscle memory.
Why would a trained officer never make a single call when the radio was sitting right there, completely functional, hooked up to a working power supply?
It is a massive psychological and behavioral contradiction. The lack of physical damage to the hull, combined with a perfectly functioning two-way radio, completely dismantles the abandonment due to emergency theory.
Yeah, you don't jump ship if the ship is fine.
The sailor does not abandon a perfectly good floating boat, and a naval officer certainly does not abandon a boat without transmitting a mayday if the radio is operational. When Lawrence turns that radio on and hears the static, the narrative instantly shifts from a tragic maritime accident to something deeply, deeply unsettling.
So unsettling.
Because the silence of that radio for 3 months wasn't because it was broken or submerged or out of power.
Yeah.
It was silent because Edward Neal either couldn't or wouldn't use it.
And the sense of unease only grows as Lawrence moves inside. He steps down from the deck into the enclosed cabin of the boat, which houses the galley, the kitchen area, and the sleeping quarters.
Right.
He pushes the door open to the galley. Now, if a boat has been adrift for months, tossing and turning in the Atlantic swells, you expect the interior to be a disaster zone. Pots and pans thrown everywhere, broken glass, signs of a frantic, desperate struggle for survival.
A mess.
But no, the kitchen's perfectly clean, everything is stowed away, and more importantly, it is fully stocked.
The inventory of that galley is crucial.
Right. Lawrence finds at least a dozen unopened packages of biscuits. There is abundant fresh water stored in the tanks. There is tea, cocoa, and powdered milk. The boat is literally an oasis of survival supplies.
Let's really analyze the locked room paradox Lawrence is now standing in.
Okay, let's do it.
The boat's hull is undamaged, meaning it's seaworthy. The radio works perfectly, meaning communication with the outside world is instantaneous. The food and water are plentiful, meaning the basic biological needs are covered.
Everything you need.
Everything. Every single resource a human being requires for survival, navigation, and rescue is completely intact and readily available. There's absolutely no rational reason for a human being to have abandoned this specific environment.
Which brings us to the most horrific discovery of all. Lawrence moves from this pristine, fully stocked kitchen into the small bedroom area just a few feet away.
Yeah.
And he finds out that Edward Neal never abandoned the boat at all. He is right there. He is lying in the bed, dead.
And the physical condition of his remains, paired with the coroner's subsequent findings, is what shatters the timeline completely, taking this from a tragedy to a full-blown physical impossibility.
Yes, because Edward Neal is severely, shockingly emaciated. He practically looks like a skeleton wrapped in skin. When they recover the body, he weighs a mere 62 pounds.
52 pounds.
The official autopsy later confirms unequivocally that the cause of death is absolute prolonged starvation.
This raises what is perhaps the most important, glaring question of the entire case. We have to look closely at the mechanics of the timeline here.
Right, the dates.
Edward Neal departed England in May. He was found off the coast of Ireland in August. He was missing for 3 full months. However, the official autopsy, utilizing standard forensic pathology techniques, concluded that at the time Lawrence discovered him, Edward had only been dead for 1 month.
So let's really process what that actually means. It means there's a 2-month gap, a massive black hole in the timeline. Edward Neal was alive out there on the ocean for 2 entire months while the Coast Guard was actively searching for him.
We really need to dive into the biological and psychological mechanics here because starvation is not an event. It is a prolonged, agonizing, systemic process.
It takes a long time.
It does. When you stop eating, your body first burns through its glycogen stores in the liver. Within a day or 2, you enter ketosis, burning fat for energy.
Right.
But eventually, those stores deplete, and the body initiates a desperate, catastrophic measure. It begins to break down its own muscle tissue, literally consuming itself just to keep the brain and the heart functioning.
It's a biological horror show.
Exactly. For a fully grown man to be reduced to 62 pounds, it takes weeks and weeks of relentless, agonizing caloric deprivation. The body's biological imperative to survive, the sheer primal drive to eat when the stomach is empty, is one of the most powerful forces in nature.
And he is undergoing this agonizing slow-motion death, just mere steps, literally a few feet away from a pantry packed full of biscuits, fresh water, cocoa, and milk. It defies every single survival instinct we possess.
Completely defies it.
I want you to think about the physical sensation of extreme hunger. Think about how loud your brain screams for food If you are starving and a package of biscuits is 3 feet away in the next room, you drag yourself to it. You crawl, you eat it. You do not lie passively in a bed and waste away to a 62-pound skeleton.
It completely shatters any logical sequence of human behavior.
Yeah.
So, as investigators, we have to look for alternative explanations, like, was he physically incapacitated?
Okay, right.
Perhaps he suffered a severe stroke or a paralyzing injury that left him completely immobile in the bed.
But wait, if we go down that route, it creates an even bigger paradox. If he was completely paralyzed and couldn't walk 3 feet to the kitchen, how did the sailboat navigate itself flawlessly for hundreds of miles? How did it avoid commercial shipping lanes, survive the open ocean, and perfectly thread the needle into the jagged rocks of Towhead Bay without a scratch? An uncrewed sailboat doesn't just safely park itself on a rocky coast.
And beyond the navigation, there is the issue of hydration. The human body can survive for weeks without food, but only a matter of days without water.
Right, water is a real timer.
If he was entirely paralyzed in bed, unable to reach the food, he also wouldn't have been able to reach the water. He would have died of dehydration long before he had the time to slowly waste away to 62 pounds from starvation.
Wow, good point.
The fact that he lived long enough to starve implies he was drinking water. And if he could access the water, he could access the food.
It's infuriating. It's like an invisible, impenetrable barrier was placed right down the middle of that boat. And even if we assume a profound psychological break, say he fell into a deep catatonia and simply lost the will to live, why didn't he use the radio in those first few days?
Right.
The radio is out on the deck. If he could get to the bed to let down, he had to pass the radio.
The mystery of the Monaveine operates like a locked room mystery on the open ocean. Every single piece of physical evidence violently contradicts the others.
It really does.
The perfectly intact hull contradicts the massive deviation in course and the treacherous final location. The flawless working radio contradicts the complete lack of a distress call from a trained naval officer. And the agonizing death by starvation contradicts the fully stocked, easily accessible pantry. It is a case that aggressively refuses to be solved because the puzzle pieces come from entirely different puzzles.
It leaves you with this incredibly haunting image. A man slowly fading away over 2 months in a bed, surrounded by every single thing he needed to save himself, floating silently on the Atlantic while the world looked for him.
Neil's case leaves us with a terrifying reality, A man who seemingly succumbed to starvation despite having every tool to survive. It challenges our assumption that survival instincts will always override everything else. But the ocean isn't the only environment that swallows logic.
No, it is not.
Let's look at what happens when this exact same paradox of ignored survival instincts and impossible physics happens on solid ground.
Yes, we are transitioning from the unforgiving ocean in 1970 to a frozen wilderness in 1982. The environment changes entirely, but the breakdown of logic remains exactly the same. We are looking at the disappearance of Don Kemp.
Okay, Don Kemp.
And just like we did with Edward Neal, we need to establish exactly who Don Kemp was because his psychological baseline is crucial to understanding the mystery. In 1982, Don is 35 years old. He is known to everyone in his life as highly responsible, deeply grounded, and reliable.
Establishing this baseline is vital for the investigative process. We need to rule out underlying variables here.
Right.
Don Kemp had absolutely no history of mental illness. He had no history of sudden disappearances, fugue states, or erratic behavior. He was not taking any prescription medications that could induce disorientation, hallucinations, or a sudden departure from reality.
He is a completely normal guy on a very specific mission. Don is taking a cross-country road trip across the United States. His ultimate goal is to research and write a book he's been passionate about concerning the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
A very focused goal.
Very focused. So he is driving his SUV, stopping at various Civil War-era historical landmarks, visiting archives, gathering material. And because he is a responsible guy, he is diligent about staying in touch with his family during the trip. Which brings us to the absolute anchor point of our timeline. November 10th, 1982.
This phone call is the last confirmed logical data point we have before the timeline fractures completely.
Don pulls over and uses a payphone to call his mother, Mary Kemp, who lives back on the East Coast in Maryland. And the conversation is completely, wonderfully normal. Don sounds happy. He is entirely lucid, speaking clearly.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
Nothing. He tells Mary all about the trip so far, updating her on his route. He mentions that he's currently driving through Wyoming, and he's super excited because in a few days, he plans to visit an Old West museum there to do some more specific historical research. They share a warm goodbye, and he promises to call her back in a few days.
From a psychological profiling standpoint, there are absolutely no warning signs in that call.
None at all.
No underlying stress, no paranoia, no confusion, no sense of impending doom. He is a man actively engaging in his passions with a clear, structured plan for his immediate future.
But fast forward just 6 short days. It is now the morning of November 16th. We are in Carbon County, Wyoming. Now, Carbon County is roughly 2,000 miles away from Mary's home in Maryland.
It's out there.
A local highway patrolman is driving his route down a desolate, lonely stretch of highway. And I really want you to visualize this environment. This isn't a bustling interstate. It is essentially the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's vast.
It's a vast high plains geography, completely flat, empty, and currently blanketed in a thick, freezing layer of snow. The wind chill in Wyoming in November is brutally cold. It is a harsh, unforgiving environment where exposure can kill you very quickly. And as the patrolman approaches a remote exit ramp, he spots something utterly bizarre.
The scene the patrolman rolls up on is the very definition of a jarring physical juxtaposition.
Sitting right in the absolute middle of the exit ramp, not pulled over on the shoulder, not parked safely to the side, but dead in the middle of the roadway, is an SUV with Maryland license plates.
Dawn's car.
Yes. The engine is still running, idling in the cold air. Both the driver and passenger doors are thrown wide open, just inviting the freezing wind inside. And scattered all over the asphalt outside the vehicle are various articles of clothing.
If we analyze this from a strict forensic and behavioral standpoint, an idling engine with doors thrown wide open and clothes strewn wildly about implies extreme haste, panic, and chaos.
Right, it's a mess.
It absolutely does not imply a voluntary, peaceful departure. I mean, if you decide to go for a hike in the snow, you turn your car off, take your keys, you close the doors to keep the snow out, you wear your clothes. This scene looks like a sudden evacuation or an abduction.
So we have a responsible 35-year-old man who just 6 days ago was happily chatting about visiting museums. And now his car is running, doors open in a freezing wasteland, his belongings dumped on the road.
It's terrifying.
The patrolman obviously knows something is terribly wrong. He pulls his cruiser over, carefully navigates around the scattered clothes on the asphalt, and approaches the idling SUV. He looks inside. It's completely empty. But as he glances through the open passenger door, looking down at the snow-covered ground just off the road, he notices something.
The beginning of an impossible trail.
Yes. There is a single set of clear footprints. They exit the passenger side of the vehicle, land heavily in the thick snow, and they don't follow the plowed road. They wander straight off the asphalt past the shoulder and head directly out into the flat, empty, white wilderness.
The discovery of these tracks immediately triggers a massive, coordinated law enforcement response. You have a missing person in freezing, potentially lethal conditions.
The clock is ticking.
Exactly. The Carbon County Sheriff's deputies arrive on the scene in force, and they initiate a dual-pronged search protocol. They have deputies on the ground, trudging through the deep snow to visually follow the tracks, and simultaneously, they call in an aerial search plane to spot the missing driver from above.
Let's talk about the specific geography these deputies are navigating. They are following these tracks for a grueling 6 miles.
That is a long walk in snow.
And as they walk, the terrain is described in the reports as completely flat and completely barren. There are no dense pine forests to hide in, no deep ravines or caves. It is a sweeping, white, snowy plain.
And that geographic context is vital to understand why the search failed in the way it did. An aerial search plane flying over a flat, white, snow-covered expanse operates on the principle of visual contrast.
Right, looking for a dark spot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A human being, likely wearing dark winter clothing or even just possessing a human silhouette against a completely flat white background, is a massive, high-contrast target. It should be easily, almost instantly spotted from the air. Yet the pilot continuously radios down to the deputies on the ground that he is scanning the horizon and sees absolutely no one.
Which makes zero logical sense. The deputies are on the ground, physically looking at fresh footprints in the snow, knowing logically they must be right behind whoever just made them. And after walking 6 exhausting miles, the tracks finally lead to a specific destination. Off in the distance, standing alone in the plains, they see a big red barn.
Finally, a structure.
Right. The tracks go straight up to the closed wooden door of this barn.
The deputies on the ground must have felt an immense surge of relief at that exact moment. A structure means shelter from the wind. It means the person likely survived the freezing temperatures. It means they found their missing driver.
The tracks go right up to the door and they stop. The deputies check the perimeter. There are no exit tracks visible on the other side of the barn or leading away from it in any other direction. So the conclusion is mathematically obvious.
Right.
The person walked through the snow, opened the barn door, shut it behind them, and is currently inside.
Right.
The lead deputy walks up, opens the door, steps inside, and the barn is completely, utterly empty.
No Don Kemp, no drifter, no one at all.
It's totally deserted. Dust and hay. So the lead deputy steps back outside, incredibly confused. He looks down at the tracks they just spent hours following, the ones leading directly to the barn door. And because the deputies have been highly trained and careful not to step on the original prints as they followed them, the tracks are perfectly preserved in the snow. The deputy crouches down, looks closely, and notices something insane. The footprints are subtly misshapen. They look slightly distorted, wider than they should be, like they've been stepped in more than once. He gets down closer, starts backtracking a few yards, and realizes with horror that all the prints along this entire 6-mile trail are double prints.
What's fascinating here is the sheer physical impossibility of the conclusion the deputies are suddenly forced to draw based on this new visual evidence.
The conclusion is that the person walked 6 miles from the idling SUV to the barn. Upon reaching the barn, finding it empty or deciding not to stay, they turned around. But instead of walking back alongside their old tracks, they walked backward in reverse, stepping perfectly, meticulously into their own original footprints, all the way back to the car.
A 6-mile backward walk in deep snow.
I want you, the listener, to really think about the physical mechanics of this. Stand up right now if you can, or just imagine it. Try walking backward for just 10 steps down your hallway. Notice how your center of gravity completely shifts.
It's so awkward.
You have to blindly reach your leg backward, guess where the floor is, strike with your toe instead of your heel, and balance awkwardly while your muscles fire in ways they aren't used to. Now imagine doing that for 6 miles. In freezing conditions. In deep, resistant snow.
The biomechanics of it are practically superhuman. You have to perfectly align your boot with a depression in the snow behind you that you cannot see.
Without looking.
Without looking. If you miss by an inch, you whiten the track or create a scuff mark on the edge of the pristine snow, revealing that 2 trips were made. It requires a level of meticulous, exhausting physical precision that completely contradicts the chaotic, panic scene left at the car.
Exactly. Why would someone who haphazardly dumped all their clothes on the freezing asphalt suddenly become a master tactician of snow evasion? It makes no sense. But the biggest, most glaring problem of all is where the trail ends. When these perfect double tracks return all the way back to the idling car on the highway, they just stop. There are no new tracks leaving the car in any other direction.
It creates a closed loop of impossible evidence.
So the person walked to the barn, walked backward in their own prints to the car, and then what? Did they evaporate into the freezing air? Did they get back in the car? If they got back in, why is the car still sitting there empty, doors open, engine running?
Right.
Did they get into a different vehicle? If they did, where are the tire tracks in the snow for that second vehicle? Where are the footprints of the person who drove it?
The physical environment is telling a story that the basic laws of physics simply do not support. You cannot be in 2 places at once, and you cannot leave a physical location without displacing the environment around you.
And this brings us to an equally frustrating and tragic part of the story. We transition from the physical impossibility of those footprints to the devastating institutional failure to properly investigate them.
This is a crucial pivot. When a physical scene or a disappearance makes absolutely no logical sense, that is precisely when you must rely on rigorous, uncompromising forensic science. The physical evidence has to do the talking when human logic fails. But what happens when the institutions tasked with gathering that evidence simply decide to ignore it?
Let's look at exactly what the local police did. They conduct a massive 3-day search. They have the deputies on foot. They bring in horses to cover more ground through the snowdrifts. They have the planes constantly circling overhead.
A massive effort.
3 days of intense, exhausting searching, and they find absolutely nothing. Then, a massive blizzard hits Carbon County, dumping feet of fresh snow and dropping temperatures to lethal levels, and the police make a decision. They officially conclude that Don Kemp either froze to death somewhere out in the wilderness, or he intentionally vanished and orchestrated this bizarre backward walking trick to hide his tracks and start a new life.
Just like that.
Because of the blizzard, the search is officially called off. The case essentially goes cold immediately.
They chose the path of least resistance. This is a classic, tragic example of a fundamental error in investigation known as confirmation bias.
Yeah.
The search teams were exhausted, the weather was turning dangerous, and they couldn't find him. So subconsciously or consciously, they decided he either died naturally of exposure or actively wanted to disappear. That specific conclusion neatly absolves the department of having to explain the impossible backward footprints or the violently chaotic scene at the car. It wraps it up in a neat, unsolvable bow.
But Mary Kemp, Don's mother back in Maryland, is not buying this neat and tidy explanation for a second. She knows her son's psychological baseline. He had absolutely no reason to vanish. He was excited about his book, and he certainly wasn't the type of person to abandon a running car, throw his clothes on the ground, and walk backward for 12 miles in a freezing plane.
No mother would accept that.
So Mary does what any desperate mother would do. She gets on a plane, she flies 2,000 miles to Wyoming, she marches right into the Carbon County Sheriff's Office, walks up to the front desk, and demands to see every single file, every single photo on her son's case.
It is the unstoppable force of a mother's intuition, clashing directly with the immovable object of institutional apathy.
And when she finally gets her hands on those files, she sits down and starts poring over the photographic evidence that the police took of the SUV on the day it was found. And she is horrified by what she sees. Clear, undeniable physical evidence of violence that the police seemingly completely ignored to fit their wandered-off narrative.
The photos are shocking.
Let's walk through the ignored damage to this vehicle because it is staggering. First, she looks at a close-up photo of the passenger side of the SUV. The side mirror is completely broken, smashed, with glass shards missing.
A smashed side mirror on an open highway is highly indicative of a kinetic event. It implies a collision, either another vehicle sideswiping the car at speed or the car being violently forced off the road into a signpost or obstacle. It does not happen spontaneously.
Right. Second piece of evidence, the rubber weather gasket. This is that thick, heavy-duty rubber seal that lines the inner rim of the car door frame to keep the wind and rain out. In the police photos, this rubber gasket is violently ripped off the frame of the door, dangling down.
Yeah, we really have to consider the tensile strength of automotive weather stripping.
Oh, it's tough stuff.
It is affixed with industrial adhesives designed to withstand years of slamming doors and extreme temperatures. It doesn't just fall off because the wind blew. Ripping that gasket requires immense, localized, frantic force. It suggests a scenario where someone is desperately clinging to the door frame to avoid being pulled out, or a violent struggle where the door was wrenched open by a second party with such extreme force that the structural seal tore.
And then there is the third, most damning piece of physical evidence in the photographs. The keys were still inserted in the ignition while the car was idling. But looking closely at the zoomed-in photos, the metal ignition key itself was completely bent in half while still seated in the ignition slot.
Let's truly synthesize what this specific damage implies, because it paints a terrifying, violent picture. Think about the metallurgy of a 1980s car key. They're usually made of solid brass or nickel-plated steel.
Not easy to bend.
To bend a piece of solid metal in half while it is securely seated inside an ignition cylinder requires sudden, violent, immense torque. You have to apply massive lateral pressure. This implies a frantic struggle inside the tight confines of the vehicle's cabin.
Like someone fighting over the keys.
Perhaps Don was trying to grab the keys to turn the engine off while someone fought him off. Or perhaps an attacker was trying to yank the keys out from a terrible angle in a sheer panic, using the key itself as a lever. When you combine a bent steel key, a torn industrial door gasket, and a smashed side mirror, the forensics are screaming at top volume that this car was either struck, run off the road, or Don Kemp was violently and forcibly dragged out of that driver's seat against his will.
But the police looked at all of that and just wrote it off as a guy who had a mental break and went for a walk in the snow. And here's where Mary realizes the true tragedy of this investigation. The absolute devastating forensics failure.
Yeah, this is the hard part.
After seeing the photos, she asks the deputies to see the fingerprint reports. She wants to know whose prints were on that bent key, whose prints were on the ripped door frame. And the police casually tell her they didn't dust the car for fingerprints.
It's a staggering admission of incompetence.
It gets worse. She asks to see the plaster casts of the footprints in the snow, those famous, mathematically perfect, backward walking tracks that define the entire mystery. She wants to see the tread patterns. And the police tell her they never made any casts.
It is an unforgivable, permanent loss of data. Let's explain why this is so devastating. Forensic investigators use materials like snowprint wax or dental stone to perfectly capture the exact dimensions, tread depth, and wear patterns of a boot print in snow.
Standard procedure.
When the Carbon County Police failed to take those casts before the blizzard hit, They forever erased the only scientific way to verify if Don Kemp was even the person walking in that snow. We all just assumed it was him because it was his car. But without knowing the shoe size, the specific tread pattern of his boots, or the weight distribution of the stride, we have absolutely no idea if those boots belong to Don.
We just don't know.
And by failing to dust that violently damaged, idling car for latent fingerprints, we have no idea who else was inside that vehicle with him during that struggle. The institutional negligence essentially allowed the truth to evaporate into the freezing Wyoming air.
It's infuriating. The physical trail goes completely cold because the evidence was literally left to melt away with the snow. The case is dead. But then, just as you think the story is over, the timeline suddenly violently fractures. We move 5 months forward. It is now April of 1983. Don has been missing since November.
And this is where the narrative shifts from a purely physical, geographic mystery to something almost paranormal in its psychological impact.
A woman named Judy Ayulu lives in an apartment in New York City. She was a very close coworker of Don's. They worked side by side in the same office for 10 years before Don left to write his Lincoln book. She knows he's missing. The whole office knows. It's been 5 agonizing months. One day in April, Judy comes home to her apartment, unlocks the door, and sees the little red light on her answering machine blinking. She walks over and hits play. The tape rewinds, clicks, and a voice comes out of the speaker. It says, "I'd like to speak to you again, call me," followed by a phone number.
It is literally a ghost calling from the void.
And I want to deeply emphasize why this is so chillingly, undeniably credible. This wasn't some muffled, distorted voice buried in static. Judy worked with Don Kemp for a decade. She knows the cadence of his voice, his specific pitch, his tone intimately. She immediately, without a shadow of a doubt, recognizes it as Don.
She knows him.
But more importantly, we have to look at the mechanics of telephone privacy in 1983. Judy's phone number was completely unlisted. It wasn't in any public phone book. You couldn't just call the operator and ask for information to get it. Only someone who knew Judy personally, who had her private number physically written down in their personal address book, could have made that call. This was absolutely not a random prank by a true crime fanatic who saw Don's story on the evening news and dialed a random number.
The unlisted number is the absolute anchor of truth in this phase of the timeline. It forces us, logically, to accept that whoever left that magnetic tape message had direct access to Don Kemp's personal, intimate knowledge, or they had physical possession of his belongings, specifically his personal address book.
Judy is stunned, terrified, but she's also incredibly hopeful. Like, maybe he's alive. Maybe he just needed to get away and is finally reaching out. So she doesn't hesitate. She immediately picks up the receiver and dials the exact number the voice left.
Right away.
The phone rings, and a man answers. But it's not Don's voice this time. Judy says, "Hi, I'm trying to reach Don Kemp. He just left a message for me to call this number." And the man on the other end of the line immediately gets incredibly nervous.
Oh, wow.
He sounds confused, highly uncomfortable. At first, he stammers and says, "Okay, I'll let you talk to him." But then just seconds later, he panics. He abruptly changes his tune and says, No, he's not here." Judy, desperate to not lose the connection, asks him to take a message. The man says, "Okay," takes her number, and hangs up. Don never calls back.
The psychology of that brief phone call is fascinating and highly suspicious.
Tell me about it.
The person answering the phone is clearly caught off guard by the name. His initial instinctual reaction, "I'll let you talk to him," implies that Don Kemp is indeed present in the location, or at least known to him. The sudden panic pivot to "he's not here" indicates a real-time realization that he's made a massive mistake by acknowledging Don's presence, followed by a hasty retreat to cover it up.
Judy knows she has to act immediately. She goes straight to the police in New York, and they coordinate across state lines with law enforcement in Wyoming. A police captain named Mark Benton in Casper, Wyoming, takes the lead on the case. He officially traces the phone number Judy called, and the trace leads directly to a specific physical address, a trailer home in Casper.
And we must highlight the immense geographical significance of Casper in this timeline. Casper, Wyoming is only about a 2-hour drive from Carden County, the exact location where Don's violently damaged SUV was found idling in the snow 5 months prior. It is well within the radius of the initial disappearance.
Right. So Captain Benton drives to the specific trailer. He knocks on the door, and a man answers. The trailer belongs to a guy named Mark Dennis. Benton explains exactly why he's there, that a phone call directly related to a high-profile missing person, Don Kemp, was traced by the phone company to this exact trailer on this exact day.
And what does he say?
Mark Dennis looks at him with total confusion and flat out denies knowing anything about a phone call to New York. He claims he has never even heard the name Don Kemp in his entire life.
Which, given the massive blanket media coverage of the abandoned SUV just 2 hours away over the last 5 months, severely strains credulity.
Exactly. Captain Benton doesn't buy it either. He senses deception. So he asks Mark Dennis if he would be willing to come down to the station voluntarily and take a polygraph test to clear his name and rule him out. Surprisingly, Mark says, sure, he'll do it. But a few days later, when Benton calls to formally schedule the test, Mark doesn't answer. Later that afternoon, Benton gets a call back. It's not Mark, it's Mark's newly hired defense attorney, firmly informing the police that his client invokes his rights and will no longer be speaking to them, period.
And that's it.
And here is where the system completely fails Mary Kemp yet again. Because Mark Dennis lawyered up and because the police claim they lack concrete physical evidence tying him to a crime, they drop him as a suspect entirely. They just shrug and walk away.
It's unbelievable.
I have to challenge the investigative logic here because it is maddening. Think about this from a law enforcement perspective. A man has been missing for 5 months. The trail is ice cold. Then an unlisted number is perfectly dialed by someone sounding exactly like the victim. The phone company physically traces that call directly to a specific address, a mere 2 hours from the crime scene. The owner of that address gives a highly suspicious denial, agrees to a lie detector, and then immediately hires a lawyer to avoid it. This is the only solid, tangible, actionable lead they have had in months. And the police just say, well, he has a lawyer now, our hands are tied.
It speaks to the incredible fragility of modern investigations. When a suspect invokes their Fifth Amendment rights and hires counsel, law enforcement cannot force them to speak. But it doesn't mean the investigation has to end.
Exactly.
It means the police must do the grueling, unglamorous work of building a circumstantial case. Getting search warrants for phone records, interviewing neighbors, surveilling the property, looking for financial ties. The Casper police seemingly opted not to invest those resources, prioritizing easier cases and leaving an agonizing, glowing loose end dangling.
But Mary Kemp, the mother who wouldn't quit, doesn't give up. She continues conducting her own private, relentless investigation this whole time, and she uncovers something truly incredible. She finds out that in April of 1983, the exact same month those ghost calls were made from Mark Dennis's trailer, there were 2 separate independent sightings of Don Kemp alive in Casper, Wyoming.
This is where the synchronicity of the evidence becomes almost overwhelming to ignore.
One sighting is by a local Casper bartender who distinctly remembers serving a man matching Don's exact physical description and demeanor. But the second sighting is even more specific, even more undeniably targeted. Someone remembers seeing a man matching Don's exact description spending time at a local traveling museum exhibit.
Okay.
And what was the historical exhibit about? Abraham Lincoln.
If we pull back and connect this to the bigger picture, the statistics become practically undeniable. Why was Don Kemp on a cross-country road trip in the freezing winter in the first place? To rigorously research a book on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. What is the statistical probability that a man who looks exactly like Don Kemp, sounds exactly like Don Kemp on a voicemail, is living in the exact same town where the ghost calls originated, and is spending his free time intently studying a traveling Abraham Lincoln exhibit?
It's impossible.
The probability of a perfect doppelganger sharing all of those highly specific niche traits is practically zero. Logic and probability dictate that the man in Casper, Wyoming in April 1983 was Don Kemp.
Which means he was alive. 5 months after his violently damaged car was found idling in the snow, he is alive and well in Casper, researching Lincoln and calling his old friends New York. The case morphs from a tragic wilderness death to a bizarre, highly intentional disappearance.
But
this brings us to the final contradiction, the brutal, physical twist that shatters the entire narrative once again and plunges us right back into the dark.
yes, because if we logically accept the Casper sightings and the phone calls as fact, the next physical discovery makes the timeline completely impossible.
We jump forward in time again. It is now October 4th, 1985. We are nearly 3 full years after the initial disappearance in November 1982. A group of hunters are hiking through the woods back in Carbon County, Wyoming. As they're walking through a remote area, they spot what looks like a pile of white rocks partially hidden in the tall prairie grass. They walk over to investigate. It's not rocks. It's a human skeleton.
Wow.
The skeleton is lying peacefully in the grass, and it's completely intact, still wearing rotting clothes. The sheriff's investigators are immediately called out to the scene. They search the pockets of the decaying pants and they find a leather wallet. Inside the wallet is a still legible driver's license belonging to Don Kemp.
The physical location of this gruesome discovery is absolutely staggering.
The body is found just 4 miles away from where the SUV was originally abandoned on the highway. 4 miles.
The official ruling from the coroner's autopsy in the Carbon County Sheriff's Department was death by exposure, with no obvious signs of skeletal trauma or foul play.
Which is wild.
The sheriff held a press conference and concluded that on the day Don disappeared in November 1982, he suffered a sudden mental breakdown, walked voluntarily into the wilderness, and died of exposure in the blizzard that hit 3 days later. Case closed.
So let's take a moment to systematically tear apart this official narrative. Because based on the established physical facts we just spent the last hour discussing, it is frankly insulting to human intelligence. Let's start with the location.
Point number 1, the physical proximity. The body was found a mere 4 miles from the car. In the days immediately following the discovery of the idling SUV, law enforcement conducted a massive, coordinated search involving deputies on foot, riders on horseback, and low-flying aircraft. They were searching a flat, bare plain covered in white snow. If Don Kemp had died in that specific area within 3 days of his disappearance, his body would have been lying directly on the surface of a flat, white landscape. How is it physically conceivable that a coordinated, multi-jurisdictional search grid entirely missed a human body lying just 4 miles from the epicenter? It defies the mechanics of a search and rescue operation.
It's completely inconceivable. Point number 2, the timeline. The sheriff says Don died in the blizzard in November 1982. If Don's skeleton was lying decomposing in the Wyoming grass since November 1982, who left a perfectly coherent voicemail for Judy Ayelu in New York in April of 1983, who had intimate access to her unlisted private phone number. Skeletons do not dial unlisted numbers.
Exactly. Point number 3, the sightings. If he was dead in the grass in 1982, who was the man perfectly matching Don's physical description who attended a traveling Abraham Lincoln exhibit in Casper, Wyoming 5 months later? A subject he was passionately writing a book about.
And finally, point number 4, the violence. The official narrative dictates that he had a mental break and wandered off peacefully to die in the snow. If he wandered off peacefully, who completely smashed the passenger side mirror of his car, who violently ripped the thick adhesive rubber weather gasket off the heavy door frame, and who exerted the immense calculated physical torque required to bend his solid metal ignition key completely in half. Peaceful, wandering men do not violently destroy the interior of their vehicles before they go for a walk.
The official narrative is a fragile house of cards built entirely on ignoring inconvenient physical evidence. The authorities chose the easiest, most legally frictionless answer exposure because it required absolutely no further investigation.
It's just so frustrating.
But in doing so, they consciously ignored the destroyed car, the verified unlisted phone call, the credible Casper sightings, and the geographical absurdity of missing a body 4 miles away during a massive aerial search.
It's a tragedy of willful institutional ignorance. And the most heartbreaking part of all this is that Mary Kemp, the mother who fought so incredibly hard, who flew across the country, who uncovered the ignored photos and traced the leads when the police wouldn't, she died in 2014. She passed away never getting answers about what really happened to her son, entirely because the initial investigation refused to look at the evidence that blatantly contradicted their easiest theory.
It is a profound institutional failure that permanently robbed a family of the truth.
So as we pull back and look at the massive themes of this deep dive, both Edward Neal and Don Kemp leave us with deeply unsettling realities. They leave us with puzzle pieces from entirely different puzzles that someone has tried to forcefully jam into the same box.
Yeah.
In the case of Edward Neal, we have the mechanics of a man who starved to death, surrounded by fully accessible food, dead for 1 month, but missing for 3. In the case of Don Kemp, we have a decomposing body that tells a convenient story of freezing to death in 1982, but a physical environment, forensic vehicle damage, and a verified timeline that loudly, undeniably proclaim he was alive, calling friends and researching Lincoln in 1983.
The environments and the timelines tell an impossible opposite story to the biological reality of the bodies themselves.
We've covered a lot of ground today, looking at the science, the failures, and the physical impossibilities. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'll let you take the final word.
Thank you. Today, we live in a world defined by digital footprints. We leave traces everywhere. Our cell phones ping towers, our GPS tracks our cars, facial recognition cameras log our movements. If someone steals your car and your coat today, technology will eventually differentiate you from the thief. But the thought I want to leave you with is this. Before the digital age, in a place like Wyoming in 1982, identity was purely solely physical. The entire mystery of Don Kemp hinges on those impossible backward footprints in the snow. The police assumed it was Don. Mary assumed it was Don. We spent this hour assuming it was Don because it was his car. Well, what if it wasn't?
Oh.
What if someone violently ran Don Kemp off the road, smashed his mirror, ripped the door open, bent the key in a desperate struggle, and forcibly took his life right there? And then, having eliminated Don, this killer took his vehicle, his coat, his boots, and effectively his physical identity.
Oh my God.
What if the person executing that superhuman, agonizing 6-mile backward walk in the snow wasn't a man having a mental break, but a highly calculating killer creating a literal red herring? A brilliantly executed physical manipulation designed to waste the police's time by staring at empty barn and impossible footprints.
Well, they got away.
And while the police were completely distracted, the killer was driving 2 hours to Casper, Wyoming, settling into a trailer, assuming Don's life, attending his Lincoln exhibits, and using his stolen address book to call New York. The moment someone else stepped into Don Kemp's boots, the physical world completely forgot Don Kemp existed. It forces you to rethink the entire paradigm of how we investigate the past. How much of our reality and the closure we so desperately crave is based simply on trusting that the footprints we see belong to the person we expect.
That is a terrifying, brilliant thought. And that is exactly why we do this. To look closely at the x-rays that don't make sense and to ask the hard questions. Thank you all so much for joining us for this deep dive. We invite you to keep questioning the narratives you are handed, especially when the pieces don't quite fit. We'll see you next time.